I promised is hear what is on your minds. That's sort of what the book's about. It costs $20. The other books I've written, one's on global grassroots, and the other is called Citizen Wealth. Both of them are for sale as well. And I'll make a deal. But I'd love to know what other questions have people on their mind, and I'll answer pretty much anything. On the book, on ACORN, weather in New Orleans.
Can I ask about the Ninth Ward and what it looks like today if only 15% of the population's returned? Have they bulldozed? Has it been rebuilding?
Well, there has been some rebuilding, and there's been some bulldozing. I mean, this is one of your classic, glass half empty, glass half full problems. There was a thing in the New York Times about 6 weeks ago which tried to show pictures of the lower Ninth Ward, and that arrangement of pictures was very controversial to our members in the Ninth Ward because it looks like the hurricane was maybe yesterday. And there's no question, there's a whole disaster tour business that picks people up in the hotels downtown and will take you out for a great $50 2-hour tour of the lower Ninth Ward, and you will think that you were there the day after the storm. Because, as Charles Darwin pointed out, there is natural selection. It'll all grow back, and we have a very verdant climate. We live in the tropics, so stuff grows. So yeah, trees grow up in front of houses, and there's weeds everywhere. And overnight, if I didn't mow my yard for a couple of weeks, it'd be knee-high by the 4th of July, as they used to say in Iowa about corn. But on the other hand, if you actually live there and look at things day by day, and I do live there when I'm not on the road, it seems like there's huge progress. Population's coming back. There's some areas that are changing. Houses keep being built. The sort of lantern effect that the planners argued would happen, which is, the lantern effect you've probably heard about in Springfield too, which is one house being able to come back, and then a block or two, like a Detroit situation where there's nobody, and then another house and declining city services. That hasn't really happened yet. But at the same time, it's all about money. If you can't get the resources, we have a tape of when candidate Barack Obama, Senator Obama at that time, was being interviewed by the ACORN National Board in the lower Ninth Ward about his commitment where he elected to rebuilding New Orleans after Katrina. And in this tape, he said, he was already a candidate. He was a candidate at that time. He was about to get the nominee, that he would make it job one. He would appoint a special czar for the Katrina footprint, and there would finally be the full resources to rebuild. Well, funny thing happened to Barack Obama as he became president. Turns out, we've had this recession, so that didn't happen. The money didn't. There's been no recharged, repriming the pump to rebuild, so we're still a dime and a dollar short. And frankly, if New Orleans is a dime and a dollar short, that would help Shreveport. I don't know where you can get the money to do these things, but yo, John.
Are there any plans to reestablish ACORN nationally?
Well, that's a very good question. There's a whole bunch of different answers. So what ACORN did when, first, if you found an organization, you run for 38 years, once you leave, you ought to keep your mouth shut. That was my view for the first couple of years. I wanted to be a dues-paying member and head of the cheerleading squad. Now, as a membership organization, running a membership organization, I don't know how you kill a membership organization. Only, in labor unions, we used to have the old rule of 7. I don't know if that's common here, but a lot of the old constitutions for labor unions said as long as there are 7 members, this is what you used to do in labor unions to make sure that companies and employers couldn't break you by breaking a strike. As long as there were 7 people who still came together and were willing to say there is a union, the union would last in perpetuity, and you'd be able to rebuild no matter what the disaster is. And that was essentially the principle behind how ACORN was built as a membership organization. As long as there was a membership that was willing to pay dues, you can't put a membership organization out of business. So not having been there, I can't even imagine how a decision could have been made to go out of business as a membership organization. So I'm not in that good a position to say, not understanding how you could ever kill it, how it could be rebuilt in that same way. So my own view is that those pieces, you know, what happened at the end for ACORN was that it tried to disassemble. There had been 38 states when I left and 100 offices. By November 5th, 2010, when they declared bankruptcy, its footprint was already shrinking. There are probably 7 or 8 different organizations in various state formations that tried to reconstruct under a different name. You know, what was Boston ACORN was now New England's for New...
United for Justice.
Yeah, for Justice, NEU4J
Number
or
4.
something, yeah, something like that. But I think that's Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island all together. And I don't know how that really works, I don't know what that really is. But anytime you say that's what it is, it's probably not what it was in either of those 3 places, much less together. So, and unfortunately, one of the lessons I learned from watching what happened to ACORN is that, you know, fundamentally, I thought we had it, you know, kind of right. We had dues income, internal income that came up with about 1/3 of the budget. We had another 1/3 of the budget, which was sort of earned income, you know, contracts and fee-for-service and a number of other things. And then we had a 1/3 that was a collection of foundation grants, CCHD money, you know, just anybody and everybody elsewhere. Now, ACORN was not a 501c3, so it didn't actually get federal money. So in some ways, the whole, you know, defunding bill from Congress, as soon as they had the James O'Keefe video problem on the housing prostitution scandal, shouldn't have affected them. I mean, they weren't getting federal money, so what's the issue? But the housing, separately incorporated housing arm was getting federal money, and so those things were all combined, but they were still different. But what is clear after watching ACORN go down is that we didn't do as good a job at making sure that we were sustainable and controlled our resources. What I thought was left in pretty good shape actually wasn't, because clearly there was enough leverage from outside sources, which were not the members, to decide the life and death of the organization and the leadership and staff's mind after I left. I can't explain that, but I can tell you, in the work I do now with ACORN International, it's an obsession for me, controlling the outside funding. I mean, this is one fellow you don't see writing a proposal to a foundation. I mean, that's not something this guy does. I mean, I'm not saying I couldn't raise money, because I raised lots of money over my years, but it's not something I think makes sense if I build a permanent infrastructure and organization. So some of these ironically, some of the organizations that survived in this rebranding, which is some kind of a marketing term I'm not sure I get, were only able to survive because they're in places where there were lots of external resources. So New York, California, you know, Pennsylvania, places where you could access resources. But I don't know if the model is different enough to survive another assault like ACORN just went. If you're going to do what ACORN did, you're going to, it's a fight. I mean, it's not going to be, you know, all the rows standing up to applaud. I mean, it's always going to be controversial. It was from the very beginning in 1970, and it certainly was at the point I left. So to me, that's just sort of what goes with the package of doing the kind of work that ACORN does and trying to empower local people. So I don't think it's going to reform. Now, there's a vacuum, and I think you have a lot of very ambitious community organizers who understand that there is a vacuum, who are trying to figure out how you would do a new formation. And I'm fascinated to see some of the pilots and some of the experiments that are out there, Ohio and upstate New York and hither and yon, and I'm not sure. So far, all of those are externally funded, so that makes me worry about them. And I'm not sure, but you know, I'm sort of a romantic about organizing, so it's hard for me to believe that eventually something better won't be put together. I just don't know how and when and who. But I certainly hope so.